this computer. Okay. So, guys, here we are with Lior Amichai. He's the actual executive director of Peace Now, Shalom Achshav, a historical peace movement in Israel. And to start our conversation, Lior, first, I want to thank you for the disponibility to be here with us. And I want to ask you to introduce yourself for our public and also to tell us on a personal note, what was your experience on the 7th of October and in the days that followed since then?
Thank you, Bruno, very much for this opportunity to speak with you and with Peace Now supporters in Brazil and Latin America. My name is Lior Amichai, as you said, and I'm indeed the director of Peace Now. I've been doing this position for the past 2 years. Prior to this position, I was the director of a human rights organization in Israel named Yesh Din, and prior to that, I was working on one of the projects of Peace Now called Settlement Watch for approximately 5 years, so I'm very familiar with Peace Now. I will also add that when I was a teenager, I was a Peace Now activist and I participated in some of its activities. So I'm a long supporter of this movement, and being its executive director is a wonderful opportunity for me to fulfill my passion and beliefs and what I think that is much needed in Israel today. Perhaps it was always needed, but it's constantly reaffirming that it is needed more than ever. A little bit about myself. I'm 40 years old. I have 3 boys who are 9, 6, and 2.5. I'm married, and I was raised in Jerusalem. However, in the past 2 decades, I live in Tel Aviv. My father is a diplomat, so as a child, I traveled a lot abroad. Actually, my best friend as a childhood, which we are still in touch to this day, was a fellow son of a Brazilian diplomat. So for many years, my best friend is still in touch. Is from Brazil, is Brazilian, and by the way, he's also went to the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he has a very successful career there. I studied at university in an Israeli and Palestinian program in London, where I studied international politics and sociology. And in parallel, I participated with 12 Israelis and Palestinians, where we sort of mutually met and discussed issues that we wanted to. And this was a very enriching program for me. It was very long, it was 3 years and very intense. And we just got to learn each other's perspectives, identities, and thoughts, and which was eye-opening for me. Even though I was peacenik from before the program, it was eye-opening in the sense of understanding Palestinian perspective and how they see or feel or both and live through this conflict and such. My master's degree I did in human rights. I also did it in London, and so this is sort of my academic knowledge. And nevertheless, let's go back to Peace Now. So after directing an Israeli human rights organization and being a researcher in Peace Now, I'm now directing Peace Now, and I think this is a pivotal moment for Peace Now because our message, I think, I don't want to be overestimating it, but I think it is the most important message and the most important issue that Israel needs to deal with. And this is precisely the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And our message is that we must reach a 2-state solution and ending the occupation over the Palestinian. This is what will secure Israel's security and will ensure Palestinian security and freedom and self-determination. It's needed. It was needed before the 7th of October. It's essential after the 7th of October. And this is what we're trying to persuade the Israeli public and its political leadership. I will say that Peace Now has sort of 2 operations that are merged, of course, into one, but nevertheless, we have the movement, where we try to influence the Israeli public through public actions, through demonstrations, through various ways to reach, through direct meetings with politicians or influencers, or through protesting on the ground, or through tours to the West Bank whatsoever. And our second operation is, of course, our Settlement Watch program, which I urge anyone who doesn't know about it and who wants to know the details of what the government and the settlers, the anti-peace, the ones who want to maintain Israeli occupation and war forever, are doing on the ground. And there we have two of the most brightest and most experienced researchers who are constantly learning and studying and making us aware of what's happening on the ground. And we've published some of the most important reports, I believe, that showcase that, what's happened on the ground, predominantly in the West Bank, but also in East Jerusalem. And if you'd like, I can expand on that later in the conversation. I'll say, in regards to your question on the 7th of October, until the 7th of October, let's say, since I joined Peace Now as the director right after the current Israeli ultra-right government was formed. That was my motivation to join Peace Now. And I said, okay, there's an ultra-right-wing government in action. This will be my opportunity to oppose it and to lead Peace Now in this moment, which will have a lot of action and things to do. And this ultra-right-wing government started on a political deal. And the deal was that the ultra-Orthodox part of the government will be excused from the Israeli military officially. The Netanyahu and his party, the Likud party, will be able to rule forever, and they will try to do that through harming the Israeli democracy, and also help Netanyahu in his trials. And the third element, which I want to focus about, is the national religious element, who received full control over Israel's policy over the occupied territories and the settlements. And this is, of course, represented by Smotrich and Ben Gvir and such. And indeed, they received control in the Israelis' policies over the occupied territories, and until recently, were perhaps the most influential part, I believe, on Israel's policy in the war. And I'll explain. Until the 7th of October, and this judicial overhaul that the government tried to promote, Peace Now, what we tried to do was to try to reach our public that was protesting regularly. And when I mean regularly, I mean more than once a week on many occasions, on mass demonstrations throughout the country on various different fronts against the judicial changes that this government tried to do. And our specific role in Peace Now was to go to this targeted audience that we are part of and to say, hey, it's not just about the judicial overhaul, or more accurately, the judicial overhaul is connected directly with the annexation and settlements and occupation over the Palestinians. It goes hand to hand, and we try to sort of educate and influence the protesters to show them the connection between Israel's policies over the occupied territories and the judicial changes that it tried to do. We saw this was our mission at the time, and we succeeded to a degree, sometimes more, sometimes less. Nevertheless, this is what we saw. The 7th of October was very dramatic because, first of all, it caught everyone by surprise. And it was, of course, a very frightening and tragic moment. And I think Israelis felt for quite a long time that there is no state, that the military is not functioning, that the government is not functioning, that the ministries are not functioning. And, until Israel controlled back its borders in Gaza, until it eliminated the last terrorist of Hamas inside Israel, took some time. And some of the reassurances that we received were from the Americans that promised, or that not only promised but also provided. Don't know the word in English, but ships with with airplanes to Israel to sort of ensure deterrence in the area and to sort of prevent by deterrence an escalation of this war to with full front with all with many other actors like Iran, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis in Yemen and such. But the feeling was that this could the state of Israel could collapse, and that if Israel reaches a full-scale war with Hezbollah, with Iran, with other actors, maybe force with the militias in Iraq and or Yemen, who knows where Israel could be, because it felt like we had no control. So this was the feeling. It was a feeling of shock. How could they succeed? It was a feeling of fear. This could escalate to something that will eventually destruct the state of Israel altogether. And it was a feeling of trauma and pain, because so many Israelis were killed, injured, or kidnapped, and it felt like we are connected. I think most Israelis were, even if not directly, but directly related to at least some people who were affected directly, because we're a small country and it reached a lot of people on one day. So it was, and I'll also add that the way that the Hamas attack on the Israelis it was ugly. It was it was all on camera. It was terror in the sense that we saw it live, and of course the stories of how people were killed, and sexual assaults and rape, and it was a very frightening moment that Israelis, I think, are still living, in some way or another, to this day. And so we were all living this period. This was the 7th of October. And I think what Peace Now did, after we sort of regrouped and sort of figured out what's happened, we realized that one, Israel is going to a military operation or a war that, on the one hand, has justifications, which were to bring the hostages back, to return the hostages back, to provide security to Israel. And on the other hand, it had no political horizon. And we immediately questioned that. We said, look, even if there are justifications to this war, a war without a political vision, horizon, goal, will result in a bloodbath and mud, we say in Hebrew. That's, because what will end the war if there's no political horizon? And we also question the fact that, is it really possible to eliminate Hamas without a political sort of horizon? Because Hamas is not just a terror group, but it's also a movement and an idea and such. And we thought that, a war is a means for policies. And without the policy, then you're just left in a bloodbath. And that was sort of our criticism. Having said that, many of our Peace Now supporters were either, a lot of the people who were affected by the attack of Hamas were peaceniks. And second, many of our fellow people were recruited on the 7th and 8th of October to military reserves to provide, so a lot of our people were in the military. A lot of our friends, our colleagues were there. Having said that, we still had our criticism and sort of reservations from the Israeli war. And soon enough, we also realized that proportionality and the Israeli sort of response was not proportionate. In Israel, we didn't see the pictures from Gaza. We didn't see the stories that you guys saw that the international community saw. We just didn't see it. We were living our trauma, and we were seeing a different sort of image of what the world was seeing because we just didn't see what's happening in Gaza. And I'll say it goes both ways because I think that while we didn't see at all what is going on in Gaza, I think the international community also didn't see much of what we were seeing, and it goes together. And that is that we were seeing what Hamas built in Gaza. We were seeing the military justifications for the attacks on Gaza, the underground tunnels that were built beneath civilian populations, below mosques, beneath schools and hospitals, UN agencies. And I think that received less of attention in the international community. And nevertheless, the Israeli public did not see at all the Gazans that were affected and injured and killed by the Israeli operation. And I think at some point, after about 3-4 months, we had an understanding that, okay, Israel went way too far. The attack is not proportionate. And it took us some time. And then I think we sort of realized that proportionality was thrown out the window and that Israel exaggerated dramatically in its operation. And our sort of response was we didn't know. How can you fight a war on terror where there is so much cynicism and when there's so much brutality and when there is, when Hamas is building its bases and tunnels beneath civilians, how can you do it? And our only answer was that it has to have also a a political sort of goal, and that has to be and that has to be something that will provide Israel with security and the Palestinians without Hamas. And then our focus was how do we convince? We have to do two things. We had a meeting in around February. The left, the more radical left in Israel, which we are, in solidarity with, started protesting against the war in around February, March last year, and we supported all of these protests, even if we didn't lead them, we were in full solidarity with them. But we thought that our role was twofold. One was to provide the Israeli public with the understanding about the political need of a two-state solution, and that this is the way out of this war. This is what will end the war, bring the hostages back, and provide Israel with security, and what will eventually also is the only way to destroy Hamas, because Hamas opposes a two-state solution, and Hamas opposes, and if you want to destroy Hamas, you have to provide an alternative for the Palestinian people that is an alternative to Hamas. And if you don't provide that alternative, then you maintain Hamas as something very influencing. And the second was to show the Israeli cynicism of the political right, that during this war, it is also doing whatever it can to destroy the possibility of ever reaching a two-state solution and a political agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. And we saw that through our Settlement Watch program. And during the war, our researchers were regularly researching on the ground and online and in parliament and wherever to see what the settlers are doing. And you can't believe it. I have a friend who went to the south of Israel on, I think, 3 days after the 7th of October. I think it's the 10th of October. And she said, look, I was driving south on the 10th or a week, maybe less, I think. And I saw a billboard of the right wing saying that we have to return to Gaza. And just think about it. 4 days after the war, 3 days after the war, a week, even though it was less, there's already a billboard. To have a billboard on, you have to have a meeting, you have to decide on a slogan, You have to have a graphic designer who will design it. You have to send it to somebody who will publish, and you have to have activists to put it on the ground. And they already did that throughout the war. We are living this trauma. We're living we are thinking what to do and to regroup, and they are already doing it. And I'm sure that if the war did not begin on the 7th of October, was a Saturday. If it began on a Sunday, it was a day earlier because most of these people don't work on Saturdays. So the point is that throughout the entire war, the government of Israel led and along with settler groups were working very, very hard to prevent a two-state solution, to prevent a possibility of this conflict ever ending. And we saw it in the war that they denied and they prevented any discussion about the day after. What to do. They just ignored it. They said, we are going to destroy Hamas. It will be a total victory. That's their language. But how, what will become instead of Hamas, what to do with the Palestinian population, how to end, no discussion. They didn't provide any alternative for Hamas. And we're seeing now that, Trump sort of forced, so it seems, Israel to end the war and to reach an agreement, but there's no plan for the day after. They didn't prepare. There wasn't any meeting about it. No alternative was thrown there. And the second, and this was our focus, was what they were doing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. During the war, Israelis and settler groups established outposts on a weekly basis. Palestinian communities were forced out of their lands due to settler violence. Funding that Israel, or money that Israel needs desperately because everything is going to the war, was thrown in billions or millions to settler, groups and to settler initiatives and to settler issues, as if there is, as if Israel it can spare any penny whatsoever. They were building roads illegally and legal and through the government. So they were doing so much work on the ground while this war was happening, while the focus of everyone is on Gaza. They were doing a lot of things in the West Bank, and we tried to provide this information and analysis both to the Israeli public and also to you and to the world and everyone. So to sum up, a long answer to a question that I don't know if I went to the direction that you wanted. What we're doing now in Peace Now is to try to provide the Israeli public with an alternative, a political alternative that Israel can go, because unfortunately, I must say, the political leaders inside Israel are failing to do so. We're not seeing Benny Gantz, who is head of the one of the big parties in Israel. We're not seeing Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid started just recently to showcase some political, and Yair Golan is also now providing some sort of an alternative. But to date, we haven't seen the political leadership in Israel providing a political alternative to the government. They didn't, throughout the entire war, they didn't say, we have to do this and this and this. We have they provided, criticism that Israel is not doing enough to return the hostages. But they didn't say how. They didn't say how they will end the war. They didn't say what's the future of Gaza or Israel in the West Bank, it was left to us to provide this. A small movement. Nobody else was speaking about it, and other left-wing groups and such. So we see ourselves. Our position is to pivot and to show to the Israeli public that there has to be a political alternative to this right-wing policy of a war forever and settlements and such. And the second is to expose the settler policy on the ground and what the government is doing in order, what they're focusing on precisely in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank. While we are, having these discussions, they're continuing to fund and build settlements and expel Palestinian communities and to enable settler violence and such. And on all of that, I can expand more if you'd like.
Thank you, Lior. You've given us quite a lot to digest. I think it's a really complex reality. So from everything that you said, I want to choose some specific topic for us to shed some light, and is amid the current escalation of violence and intentional polarization that we have in Israel. I want to ask you if you believe that the Israeli society is willing to reassume its values in a search of lasting peace, and if you think that Shalom Achshav have a role to lead this cultural and social transformation on this direction.
Wonderful question, if I understood it correctly, at least. So see by my answer if I understood it correctly, and if not, please tell me where you want me to focus on. I think that the majority of the people of Israel are not ultra-nationalist settlers. They don't support the ideology of the settlers, and they don't wake up in the morning and say, how do we kill Palestinians and how do we establish new outposts in the West Bank? I think that the Israeli politics was kidnapped by this ideology and by this political power. I also think that it's more complicated than that, because I think that the Israeli public are not peaceniks, and that they are, in a very different place in their relations to the Palestinians. They don't believe, they think that all Palestinians are Hamas, and that they don't believe right now that you can have a peaceful, agreement between the Palestinians. It doesn't seem realistic. They see things in a security prison, and they don't trust the Palestinians. So it's hard. I think that the opportunity is that if some political or any political sort of horizon will come about, for example, if Trump, which we oppose, of course, dramatically, but if, for example, Trump would impose, or like what Trump did, Trump imposed on Netanyahu to end the war and to return the hostages, the Israeli public will support it. If Trump would impose on Netanyahu to reach a two-state solution, the Israeli public will support. I think that it will be challenging because the ultra right wing in Israel, the national religious ideologicals, who have now the control over the Israeli politics in that sense, they, under my analysis, will not deter from using violence and all means in order to prevent this. I think that if Israel would reach a place that it's willing for political agreement, the majority of the Israeli public will support, but it will be hard to do it, to implement it within Israel due to the risk or the violence that the national religious could use and will use, etc. It will also be hard to convince the Israeli public that we can have peace with the Palestinians because of how the Israelis view the Palestinians today. Nevertheless, I think that despite the huge challenge, that will be possible with assurances of security and all the advantages that Israel can benefit from such an agreement, and precisely in regards to security and economy. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I do think that if we look back at the liberal camp, or the camp in Israel that perceives itself as the democratic camp or the liberal camp, or those who are protesting against the judicial changes, but are not protesting against the occupation, this public is a public that would support it, I believe, and that polls show that it supports once and again any political agreement that would provide Israel with security and eventually the Palestinians with freedom and self-determination.
Totally, you answer all the question. Thank you. And before we go back to the actual subjects that we need to talk about, I want to get this point of the population of Israel and talk about something that is coming up in 10 of February. That is a mark of the 42nd birthday of the assassination of Emil Grunzweig. And In this way, Emil, we can say that he lost his life defending the vision of a more justice and human Israel. Today, we can see an increasing internal violence and extremism with this right-wing extremism government. So how does Shalom Achshav keep Emil memory alive and translate it into a practical action against the hate? And how do you, Lior, feel that the legacy of Emil is being projected and protected still today?
So, wonderful question, and very impressive that you're aware of Emil Greenspan's murder and assassination during the protest, and I'll be glad to elaborate. I just want to say one more thing regarding your previous question about the role of Peace Now. I didn't mention it. And I think that, Peace Now is not the movement that it was during Emil Greenspan's time. We're not as powerful as, and our impact is much less than what we were in the 80s and 90s and even in the early 2000s. Nevertheless, we have a crucial role today, and that is to, and what I said earlier, not only to showcase the Israelis, and when I say the Israelis, it's the Israeli public, but also the Israeli decision makers from our camp, what's happening, and to explain to them, and we're doing that, it's hard work, but to explain to them why the right-wing policy is so harming and so dangerous to the state of Israel. We definitely have a role in providing the Israeli public and the Israeli society and the Israeli politicians and journalists an understanding of the dangers of the right-wing policy, how it's relevant to them, and why it must change. And I think that in any shift of Israeli policy, whenever that may come, we have a crucial role in being there to help mitigate and explain and influence and to push and eventually mobilize this camp to what we see as the only position that can, secure Israeli democracy and the Palestinians' freedom and, of course, security for both. So that said, in regards to Emil Greenspan, I think that, for us as a camp, indeed, it's very important to remember and to reflect on how the killing of Greenspan is relevant to this day. And about the freedom, today Israel is after, I don't know how many years we're protesting, 6 years now, we're protesting regularly on the streets against, it started with the trials of Netanyahu, so against the corruption, and then it moved to, the hostages now. So we're years of it's so from the corruption of Netanyahu to the judicial overhaul, and now to the return of the hostages and the ending of the war. So the Israeli society is protesting, and it's protest. The Jewish Israeli society is protesting regularly for many years, and I think that we have to. I would take two things from Emil Greenspan. One is that these protests are not about what we want them to be, which is on the political issue about the two-state solution and ending the occupation. And I think this is our role to try to help the protesters realize this and to push them there. And the second is that throughout these protests, we, the protesters, have been accused by the right wing of being violent and dangerous, and yet these are the most peaceful protests as could be. It's an example, I think, of how democracy should look like. We're seeing Israeli citizens protesting for their rights, fearing that the government will destroy democracy, that they will encourage corruption, and that they will neglect its citizens that are kidnapped by Hamas. These are the protests that the Israeli public is doing for now so many years in a peaceful manner, in a creative manner. They're doing it with fear, with a lot of anger and a lot of passion, and yet peacefully and democratically. And I think that if we look at right-wing protests, it's a different image. It's a much more scary one. And we can look at Emil Greenswag and the killing of Emil Greenswag, but also during the disengagement from Gaza and during the protests before the disengagement of, during the Oslo Accords. Violence was used regularly and much more. It wasn't. It was a legitimate use, or by at least by some of the right-wing protesters. So there's a huge difference, I think, in the societies and how they understand protest and violence and demonstrations. And as we mark the 42nd year of the death of Emil Greenswag, I think I would take it to a place that we have to remember that we can never neglect the political issue of Israel. We cannot just, and this is what I would say to my camp. It's not just about corruption and judicial overhaul and the hostages, all very crucial issues. We must not neglect the political issue, and that is what Emil was protesting against. And the second is that to provide uh, proudness in us as a camp that's protesting for so many years in a democratic way, fiercely and yet non-violently, unlike, unfortunately, the right-wing camp in Israel, which is not democratic and unfortunately also uses violence as a means when in many times when it protests.
Yes, it's wow. So in this path of democracy and in this path of the demonstrations that you tell us that is the most peaceful demonstration that we ever had, I want to ask you about the Arab-Israeli participations. So we know that it's always an issue when we talk about Israeli politics and Israeli democracy. What I want to ask you is, how does the Arab Israeli citizen participate in Shalom Achshav movement? And if you have seen a reduction in the social tension between the Arab and the Jewish Israeli through this involvement, or inside the movement, you also have these tensions?
Okay, good. So, complicated question or answer to a very important question. I think I'll say first of all that all what I said so far in this conversation reflected the Jewish public in Israel. The Palestinian citizens of Israel, their story and their what they're going through is something much different, much more difficult. But their ability to protest and demonstrate is limited to a degree that is, I think, undemocratic and preventing of freedom of speech and demonstration. They cannot, the way they're treated for saying legitimate political ideas and aspirations and thoughts is different. And it's in different levels. It's from the legal level, where we see the police arresting them, preventing the demonstration, using violence against their peaceful demonstrations. It's in their figure of speech. We see Palestinian citizens of Israel being arrested for voicing their opinions on social media. It's also in the workplace and in society, where we're seeing Palestinians being silent, and if they dare speak, they know that it has unfortunate consequences from their counterparts and workplaces, etc. So the Palestinian citizens of Israel are having it much more harsh and rougher, and indeed it questions the whole essence of democracy when we treat this minority as Israel does. I would say two things. One, I think that there is, and I'll say another thing, that the Palestinian citizens of Israel are not finding their place in the 5-year, 6-year protests that I've said that Israelis are going through, the Jewish Israeli public is going through. They're not there, and they're not there because they're in a different narrative, and their sense of what the Jewish public is fighting for is a different one. What they're fighting for, they're fighting for their lives. The criminal, what's going on in the Palestinian situation is a different story, and the Jewish public is not, I would say, sophisticated, clever, and open enough and brave enough to include them in the story of the state of Israel. And it's tragic because if the Jewish public in Israel will not realize that it is, you know, it is right to it is needed, it is our value system, it's democratic, and we have to deal with the Palestinians, but it's also, politically needed, then our camp will lose. The right wing in Israel will maintain political power as long as the center and left in Israel will not cooperate with the Palestinian political forces in Israel, the legitimate ones, and they are. And unfortunately, we're seeing that even our camp and our leaders are delegitimizing the Palestinian population in Israel, their politics, their and their needs and interests, and etc. And so there's a lot of work to do, I think, in what I'll tell you what we're doing in Peace Now. In Peace Now, our view is as the following. And one is that we are trying to influence the Israeli Jewish population. So therefore, you will not see many Palestinian citizens of Israel that are part of our group, that are in the think tank, that are in the thinking, that are working with us directly, because we feel that we have to influence the Israeli center, the one that doesn't know what is happening. And our sort of analysis says that the Palestinians know they don't need us. They don't need us to show them the occupation and how important it is to reach a two-state solution and a political agreement. They are much more aware, and they don't need us lighting this blind spot that the Jewish people in Israel have. The second is that we view ourselves in solidarity with all groups to our left and also to our center right that share the 80%, 90% of our vision, that understand that human rights, democracy, self-determination, freedom, and security is this. So we will never participate in the delegitimation that we see to the Palestinian groups or to more radical left-wing groups, even if sometimes we won't agree. And I also say it's also to the center. We try to sort of not to be snob, we say, into you're not too much to the center, which we see as part of our camp. We think that our political analysis or our vision is of solidarity. We have to get the center in Israel that self-identifies as democratic and liberal, and we have to go all the way to the radical left, and of course include the Palestinian voices and their political sort of with all their different political differences, in order to eventually we're talking politics at the end of the day, and in order for us to win and to push Israel to a better path, I think this is the camp that will have to learn to work together, and and that is, I think, the only way to have political power in Israel.
Thank you, Lior. I think it's you really shed some light in really important topics here. And in this point of the work of Shalom Achshav, I want to ask you specifically about the work that you do in the West Bank, in the settlements. It's clear that the war in Gaza, it was not specifically, but almost like a cover to the work that the occupation minister is doing in the West Bank. And we know that Shalom Achshav is one of the movements that is there, is fighting against, and is doing all that you can to bring some peace and some justice and some democracy for people there. And I want you to share with us a little bit more of the current situation now. I heard that, I don't know, last week, we have more pogroms happening there, really violent pogroms. And what is your vision for the, I don't know, near future for that situation?
Okay, so Let me understand if I got your question, because on the one hand, we have a lot of work in the West Bank to expose what is happening in the West Bank by settlers, and the second is what is my vision is, right? So if I'll say what's happening, then it sounds like a cliche, but I've been with Peace Now officially since 2011, I believe, and uh, ever since I'm at Peace Now, that's nearly 15 years, or 14 years. It's always been, they're doing a lot, and it's really damaging, and it's really harming the possibility of a two-state solution or and freedom of Palestinians and ending the occupation and such. And every year we expose that they do so much, and indeed they do so much, and I don't regret anything that we said, because every year they do a lot and we have to stop it. What they did since this government was formed, and even more so since the war began, is something that I don't think we've ever seen, and I don't want to, you can't undermine that. They have, during the war alone, they established what we counted on the ground. It's not like you can go to a library and read it or go to the news. Our researchers went and explored the West Bank on a regular basis, and they counted, I think, slightly more than 50 outposts during the war. There is 52 weeks in a year, so it means an outpost. Just to clarify, an outpost is a settlement. It's settlements are all illegal according to international law. In Israel, Israel treats settlements as something legal in its essence. It's not, but that's how Israel treats it. But outposts are also illegal according to Israeli law. And they established about a settlement, a new outpost every week. A new outpost every week, it means that at least one family or a couple of families moved. It means to that place. It means that they build some sort of physical home there. It means that they took a hilltop. It means that Palestinians, farmers who went to that hilltop cannot go anymore. It means that soldiers are now securing that hilltop. It means that there's a road that they curved illegally to reach that hilltop. And it's much more control over the occupied territories through these 50 new communities. And they're continuing to do it. So since the government was formed in, 2 years ago, the number is even much higher. I think, I don't want to say a wrong number, but I can double check quickly to tell you. So they've built a lot of outposts. They have confiscated through this, form that the government of Israel, the military and the government of Israel do, a lot of private Palestinian land. They declared them as state land, which is, in Israel, it's a way to fool the people. It's to take lands from the Palestinians and to eventually enable them for settler use. They did it on nearly 25,000, more than 24,000 dunams of land. Just to give you an example, in the 30 years before that, they did it to 50,000 lands. So still a lot, 50,000 dunams of land. It's a lot of land to take from Palestinians and to enable for settler usage. In 1 year alone, they did half of that. So half of what they did in 30 years, they did during the war, or in 2024. They've transformed money in scales that we can't imagine. There is in 50% of all of the or 25%, sorry, of all of the budget that goes to Israeli roads goes to the West Bank settlements roads. So they're building systematically roads in order to connect the settlements to the state of Israel while we're in an economic crisis because of a war. That doesn't prevent them to continue to fund settlements and roads to the settlements and settler initiatives. They have built ministries that deal precisely with how to expand settlements. They have, for the first time, have enabled direct government money through ministries to the illegal outposts. So Israel is now these outposts that are illegal according to Israeli law. Until this government, they've transferred money to these outposts in covert ways. They found ways to give them the money through organizations or through regional councils. Now there's no shame. There's ministries in the Israeli government that are directly funding them in millions of shekels or dollars. So this is what they're doing. And last but not least, or you know what, before we go to last but not least, but settler violence. During the war, Ben Gvir has provided Israeli settlers, violent settlers, with guns at will. They have created groups of settlers to, officially to provide security to the outposts and to the settlements, but in essence have enabled those who are participating in settler violence. It completely erased the definition of who's the attacker. Is it a settler? Is it a police officer or a soldier? We don't know. You will see settlers in half uniform or soldiers participating in settler violence. This is in a scale that we have, in intensity that we haven't seen. Right after the war began, I think 19 communities of Palestinians have left their lands due to settler violence. It's a number that's unprecedented. It's true that before the war, 6 communities have left due to settler violence, right, recently. So it's not something new. I don't want to say that settler violence started now or under this government, but it got a lot of backing and support and weapons and legitimization under this government, and eventually results, to kick 20 Palestinian communities from their lands it's dramatic. And I'll say that according to B'Tselem Human Rights, I think there's 12 other communities that are under risk, that have partially moved due to settler violence. So they're pushing the Palestinian community from Area C, and they're doing it systematically. And last but not least, they've also legally annexed the territories. And Peace Now revealed this in a leak that we provided the New York Times, where we recorded Smotrich saying in his voice that they've annexed. And this was headlines all over the world because it was a smoking gun that we tried to tell the world and to the Israeli public all along that this annexation that is happening, and all of a sudden we brought it in Smotrich's voice. He sort of declared it, and he said, "Yes, we've annexed the territories, and Netanyahu is on full board, full support, but we didn't do it celebratory. We didn't do it with a ceremony. We didn't do it officially because we know that there would be international consequences. But in essence, they have built a ministry of annexation and settlements. They have a director to that ministry. They have funds in that ministry. They have civil servants in that ministry. They have legal advisors in that ministry. And today you have legal advisors that, that are civil servants of the Israeli society, that, a civil servant has to report to the Israeli public, to, like a civil servant in Brazil. First and foremost, it has to report to the Brazilian public in Israel as well. But under occupation, it's not like that. You have to report, you have to look at the people under occupation, their interests as well. And now you have a ministry in Israel that is responsible for settlements, but not for the Palestinians. And you have legal advisors of this ministry that deal with settlements, and you have legal advisors of the military that deal with the Palestinians in the same territory. So Israeli annexed these territories during the war and provided security and removed responsibilities and authorities from the military to this ministry headed by Smotrich. And so they did quite a lot under the disguise or while we were at war, and they're still doing so.
Hard times we are living. So I want to keep on that way of the political path that we see in Israel, with a far-right extremism government. Netanyahu currently govern with the most radical base in Israel history, right? And figures like you were mentioning, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they brings a direct threat to democracy, as you already said, and to the Israel state's founding ideals. So my question is, how can Shalom Achshav mobilize an effective resistance to the safeguard of the democracy values, and, I don't know, prevent Israel from succumbing to a theocratic state or to more authoritarianism? Yeah, that's it.
It's very unfortunate. I have to go because I have another meeting that I can't be late to, so I have to finish really quickly. I'll be more than happy to expand in a different time if you'd like. I'll say in a sentence or two
So,
that this
yeah,
is what you ask for is our mission exactly. This is what we wake up in the morning and we try to figure it out. It's hard. There's no clear answer. But I think that this is our mission, and we have to influence what I think is the great Israeli public, that even if it doesn't wake up and is a Peace Now activist, in its value system, is liberal, is not racist, and can live in a political agreement with the Palestinians because of the benefits and because it doesn't oppose the humanity of the Palestinians. And anyway, but I'll be happy to expand more about it sometimes else.
perfect. So we can continue at another time. No problem. Just let me stop the record here.